This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, Rabbi say Sefer Daniel, Perek, Pasuk Chafei. The handwriting is on the wall. We're reading about how at the party of Belshazzar, and he's gloating over his kingdom, and at that point, a hand comes down and writes 4 words which are unintelligible even to his magicians and necromancers and sorcerers and astrologers and stargazers. And he says that whoever is able to decipher the meaning of these words, he will wear purple, like Mr. Sherman, and he'll wear a chain around his neck. That's the only thing you're missing, right? A golden chain around his neck, and he'll rule over a third of the Malchus, right? So
that was pretty cheap. Achashverosh was going to give Esther half the Malchus.
I guess Achashverosh learned a lesson. He has to up the offer, you know?
Well, that's the first offer. When you negotiate, you don't give the whole thing.
It could be it's the same thing, you know. Achashverosh says up to, not half, up to. So what's the number directly under half? You could say...
but here he didn't say ad shlish.
He said, right, exactly. No, it could be a shlish, and up to half is the same, right? Anyway, so... Says Daniel, Udinak Sava. This was the writing di Rishim that was inscribed. Menei tekel ufarsin. These 4 words. Menei tekel ufarsin. In other words, God has counted, He has weighed, and He has cut. So Daniel says this is the interpretation. Pasuk Chavav Dina Pishar Milsa. Here's the interpretation of the matter. Menei. The word Menei means Mina Elaka Malchusach V'Hashlama. God has counted your kingdom and has completed it. In other words, He's ended it. He's finished it off. Now, interestingly, he does not translate both words Menei. He only translated. The handwriting on the wall said Menei Tekel Uparsin. So what happened to the translation of the first Menei?
Well,
so God made 2 countings.
Whenever you count, you have to count a second time to make sure the first count is accurate. When you do inventory, you always have to do at least 2. Make sure you make a mistake. I'm not saying Kadosh Baruch Hu made a mistake, but he had to have it certified maybe.
It also says that the dream was repeated twice because Nechom Elikim asked.
It was immediate. It was going to happen immediately. So the Malbim points out, why does it say Menei 2 times? Because there are 2 countings that Hashem counted. Yirmiyah said, you're going to serve these Goyim and the king of Bavel for 70 years. And when the 70 years are over, Hashem is going to punish the king of Bavel. And then there's another pasuk that says that you're going to serve him and his son and his grandson. So in terms of the 70 years of Bavel, that has been completed. But in terms of serving the son and the grandson for a total of 70 years, if Belshazzar would have had a zechus, then he would have had another year.
Why? He was 24 years?
In other words, one of the countings is being ignored because there are really 2 psukim. One pasuk says Bavel will be a power for 70 years, but there's another. So that was true because Nebuchadnezzar arose to the throne a year before the nations began to serve him. So the first Menei, the first counting, Hashem is sort of overlooking. Hashem is not giving him the full 70 years. So that's why one of the countings has been omitted. Pasuk Chav Zayin, Tekel. What does the word Tekel mean? Tekilta v'maiznaya. God weighed your merits and demerits on the scales. V'hishtechachat chasir. And He found you to be missing. Found you to be lacking and empty. Peres. What's Peres? Perisas malchusach. God has cut your malchus. Vihivas, and He has given it lamaday uparas, to maday and paras. Now, interesting, the word on the wall was not paras. The word was Parsin. What happened to in other words, what does the word parsin mean? The word parsin means 2 parasas. So in that sense, it means the following. Number 1 is parisas malchusach. Hashem is going to cut it. Hashem is going to cut your malchus. And the second thing is, who is He going to give it to? He's going to give it to paras. So even though the country paras has...
Parsin means 2 priests.
2...
One is for paras and one is for cutting.
Yes, correct. Parsin is 2 parases. Paras could mean a country. Paras could mean to cut. So in this case, it means both. Hashem is going to cut it. Hashem is going to cut it away from Bavel. Give it to who? Paras. So you'll ask, why Paras? Why not Madai? After all, the answer is Madai is only getting it for 1 year. So we're sort of ignoring them. But primarily after Daryavesh, who was, we're going to assume for simplicity, Daryavesh was a son of Achashverosh and Esther. Daryavesh's son-in-law was the king of Paras. Who is that? Koresh.
Why was Paras Zocha to get it for a longer time and Mother only for a year? What? Mother didn't have this custom. Paras had this custom.
I don't know. We know that Paras. Paras built the second Beis Hamikdash, right? In fact, Koresh, right? Koresh did it. No. In fact, Koresh, Hashem wanted him to be Mashiach, even though he wasn't even Jewish.
The first time.
Well, we have to understand what that means. You have to understand what that means. But he was going to be do the kibbutz guys. Okay. So pasuk chavtes Beidayin. What's Beidayin? Then Amar Belshazzar said, "V'halbishu Daniel." They clothed Daniel what? Argivana, purple. V'hamenicha didavan, a golden chain al savri. They put around his neck. V'hachrizu alayah, and they proclaimed about him dilahave shalit, that he should rule over talta b'machusa, 1/3 of the kingdom.
How do you know that he was saying was true? It wasn't testable right now.
He had the intuition that,
I mean, they had the experience from the first time that it came true.
He had a good record.
It's not exactly.
It made sense. It was
exactly what he wanted to hear.
It made sense. It was. He was able to read the words. He was able to break down the words, and they trusted him. And by the way, the Perek ends off on a side note. By the way, the king was killed that very night. So after that whole thing where the hand comes down and writes on the wall, money, to Kelo Parson, and the king is so upset he doesn't know what it means, and Daniel tells him, by the way, it means Hashem has weighed your malchus, and He has found you to be guilty, and that's the end of you. Well, in fact, that was the end of him. Because that very night, he was killed.
By whom?
By whom, you ask? Who killed him?
I didn't do it.
Jihadists.
Who killed him? So let's see Rav Sadia going.
Daryavesh wanted to make a coup. He wanted to become king.
Daryavesh. Right. Oh. So let's see. Who killed him? Rav Sadia going brings down. Umi Hargai. Who killed him? Sris Echad, one officer, Shomer Rosh HaMelech, who guarded the king. Shekivan Sheshaman Nevos Daniel. Once he heard Daniel's prophecy, Amar Beliba Bevadei Zehosh Daniel Dvav Nechayimim. This man, he knows what he's talking about. Let me make sure that the nevuah comes to fruition. Halach v'haragas hamelech. He went, he killed the king. V'yatsa es roishai. He took v'lakach es roishai. He took his head. V'yatsa min ha'ir. He left the city. V'haylicha l'karesh v'daryavesh hatzar ma'bavel. He brought it to the generals of the Persian and the Median army, who were Karesh and Daryavesh. So when Karesh and Daryavesh, who they had been trying to attack Bavel and they had not been succeeding, so when they get the package of the head of the king, that empowered them to keep on going. Right? God delivered it to their hands. Like Yirmiyahu said, Okay. Rabbi say we're about to begin Perek Vav. Perek Vav is one of the Most fascinating prakim in the whole Sefer. Okay, so now we have a new king. What's his name? Daryavesh Mada. Daryavesh the Mede. Kabel Malchusa, he accepted his reign. How old was he? Kivar Shnen Shitin Vesartin. He was, how old? 62 years old. Now who could care less how old he was when he became king? So Rashi wants to know, Lama Mana Shnaisav, why do we have to know how old he was? To tell you that on the day that Nebuchadnezzar entered the Heichal in the days of Yehoiakim, Daryavesh, his adversary, was born. Why?
Does this follow, if we say that Daryavesh was Esther and Achaverish's son, does this follow timeline? Why?
Yeah. Oh, Daryavesh?
Yeah.
There was two Daryavesh. I don't think the first one was...
Darius the first and
Even
Darius the
says
second.
this is not the right Daryavesh.
The second one was the son of,
Rise to me is not
Esther.
the
Not this
Persian.
one.
Darius.
Not this one.
Let's see Rashi.
Darius.
Rashi says, why do I need to know how old he was? It's in order to know that he was born on the day that Nebuchadnezzar became king. Because, why? Because Nebuchadnezzar entered his palace in the 8th year of his reign. So Nebuchadnezzar had how many years left? 62.
What do you
So that
mean
means,
he entered the palace in the 8th year of his reign? Where did he live?
well, until then he was exiling the Jews in Eretz Yisrael.
Daniel made a mistake.
Right? Rashi brings down, Galu b'mei Yehoiachin.
So it's not counted to his kingdom until he sits in his palace?
Yeah, in a certain regard, it's not counted until he was Nechnas Lahechalai. And from that moment, already Daryavesh was born. Okay. Pasuk base. Shifar Kadam Daryavesh. It was proper before Daryavesh, it was pleasing to him. Vahakim al Malchusa, he established on his reign. La'achashtar Penaya, his governors. Me'av Esrin, 120 governors. Di lehavain b'chol Malchusa, that would be in his whole Malchus. In other words, his idea was he's going to set up a system of government, 120 governors.
That's where the Knesset got 120 seats from.
That's right. It had to come from the Persians, right? 120. Ve'ela minahain sarchen talasa. And above them were 3 viziers. Whatever that means.
One step up in the ranks.
Another step up.
Daniel had
3 high-ranking officers were above them. Di Daniel Chad min Hain. One of them was Daniel. After all, we just learned Daniel ruled over third. Di lehevoin achashtar pnai ilain, so that these governors Yohavin lahain taima will give them advice. So these 3 chief governors would receive their reports and their advice and their ideas from the body of 120 advisors. Umalka loy leheven nezek, and this way the king would not be harmed. With this strong government set into place, with 3 chief ranking officers, and they would be advised by 120 chachamim, the king would suffer no losses. Okay. Also, the king wouldn't have to do anything, right? Okay. Pasuk Dalet. Edayin Daniel Dina. Then this Daniel Hava Misnatzach would overpower Al Sarchaya v'Achashtar Panaya, over all the viziers and all the officers. That means he would dominate the conversation. He would dominate the discussion. He was the primary. In other words, when Daniel walked into the room, all eyes were laid on him. They all looked to him. Why? Kal Kavel, because the Ruach Yatirabe, he had an extra measure of spirit. Umalka Ashis, and the king wanted Lahakamuse to establish him al kol malchusa over his whole kingdom. In other words, the king saw his dominance, his domination, his prowess, and the king wanted him to, be in charge. Pasuk Edayin, then Sarchaya v'Achashtar Panaya. If I were to ask you, if you're in the government and you see this Jew, he's dominating, what would you want to do?
Get rid of him.
Knock him off. Come up with some kind of pretext against him. Edayin, at that time, Sarchaya, the vizier Zachash Darpanaya, Havo Va'ayin Ila, they were looking for a pretext. Lehashkacha LeDaniel.
To make him lost.
Mitzad Malchusa. What does the word Lehashkacha mean?
To make him lost of the kingship.
To make him lost?
Yeah, to exterminate it, to exclude him,
He's not a bug.
extricate him.
Hashkach means to destroy, no?
Lashkacha means to make him lost from the kingship, to get lost, like you said.
Find fault.
Hashkacha means to find.
Find fault.
To
Like,
find?
yeah, like
Sometimes
Lahamtzi.
it means to
Hashkach.
find.
That's a Rav Sadia going.
Yeah.
Right, Lehashkacha means to, not to forget, to find.
To find the Malchus that
No.
they were against.
To find a pretext. To find an alila.
Find an alila.
Find ila hashkacha daniel mitzam chusa. V'chol ila ushchisa, and every pretext and every corruption, la yachlin lahashkacha. They were not able to find. Kol kavel di mehimanhu. Because he was trustworthy. He was an honest guy. He reported all of his earnings. He paid income tax. He was a straight shooter. V'chol, he wasn't a shtickmeister. V'chol shalu, and every error, ushchis, and every corruption, la hashtikhas aloi, cannot be found in him. They try to find, he said, give us your birth certificate. Fine, I'll give you your birth, give me your passport. Fine, give me your green card. Where did you daven when you grew up? No problem. Who's your rat? No, everything was clean, everything was clear. He didn't hide any documents. Okay. Edayin, but then, these guys had a good idea. Govraya ilay chamran, these men said, Dila nehashkach leDaniel dina kalila. If we can't find any pretext against this Daniel, lahein, however, hashkachna alohi bedas elahei. We will find regarding the laws of his God. In other words, we know that he's very committed and devoted and loyal to his God, and we're certain we could find that his devotion to his God will present a conflict to his devotion to the king. And therefore they came up with the following suggestion. Edayin. What does Edayin mean? Then. It only begins every single pasuk with that word, right? Sarchaya, the viziers, Vachash Darpanai, the officers, Elaine, these Hargishu al Malka. What does the word Hargishu mean?
They made notice.
Ragash to feel, no?
Regesh. They made him feel. They made
Literally, it means to feel.
It means to make notice.
Hargish, to feel. Echata magish. How do you feel?
Can you pass me a Chumash, a Siddur, please? The word lahargish usually means to feel, but I'm going to read to you a part of davening, and you tell me what it means. I am not going to show you part of davening and ask you what it means. I'm going to tell you pasuk in Tehillim. Perek Beis.
Lama rog shugayim.
Lama rog shugayim. Lama rog shugayim. What does it mean? Lama rog
Shu
shugayim?
over there means they gathered.
They gather. So Rav Sadia Goin means to gather. Sadia Goin says, it means like this. Edayin, sarcha v'achshav ne'ilain.
Why are they so mad at us?
Why do they gather? Why do they amass themselves? Hargishu amalka. They caused a stir. They gathered to the king. They said to him, Daryavesh malka la'omen chayi. Long live King Daryavesh. Isya'atu. Like nisya'atu. They have conferred. They have taken counsel. Kal sarche malchus, all the viziers of your kingdom. Signaya, the princes, Vachash Darpanai, the officers, Hadavraya, the generals, the Fachavasa, the governors, Lekayama Kiyam Malka. We want to uphold the laws of the king. They come to the king and they say, we want to uphold your laws. Ulasakafa Esar. We want to give strength to your prohibitions. And therefore, we want to say like this. We want to make you more powerful. We want to put you on stronger footing. Therefore, kol di yivei va'u, anyone who makes a request, min kol elah, from any god, ve'enosh, or any man, ad yomin telasin, for the next 30 days, if we see anyone making any request from any god or any man for the next 30 days, lahein minach malka, besides from you, the king, Yisrame Lagoy Yavasa, should be thrown into the lion's den.
What kind of shtus is this? They're going to say somebody makes a request, and if they make a request from another god, the Avodah Zarah was rampant. That means that they're disloyal to the king and thrown into the lion's den? When Daniel has the history with Nebuchadnezzar and Daryavish knows what he did?
Well, they're buttering up the king.
He was just appointed king.
When a king hears that his officers want to...
He's 62 years old. It's not like he's a little kid.
Yeah, but when the king hears that the officers want to put him in strong footing, he doesn't realize they're out to get Daniel, right? Who does Daniel ask anything of?
Kadosh Baruch Hu.
So the king is not thinking, Daniel goes to daven in the shtibel Shachris Mincha Marav.
But even Nebuchadnezzar was talking about Shevach Hanadot Kadosh Baruch Hu, and Daryavish.
This is just 30 days.
What the Nebuah was about HaKadosh Baruch Hu said it's going to be the end of days of Nebuchadnezzar, and Kach Haya. If anything, he's going to be more concerned about Daniel's God than these advisors. They don't have the track record Daniel has.
But they said that they want
Right now, this is just a 30-day...
The supreme, the king's law supreme. If he doesn't follow your law, means he's against you.
Yeah, when the king hears that people want to uphold his law, he's only so happy to abide. And then they say to him like this, Ke'an Malka, therefore king, Tekim Esara, strengthen your prohibition, Visir Shum Ksava, and write it with an inscription. Dilala Hashnaya, that it should not be changed. Kedas Madai Uparas, like the laws of Madai and Paras. Dila Sedeh, that will never be expired.
Where does Paras come in here? He was only the king of Madai.
Yeah. Now they had an agreement.
So you be the king.
Paras and Madai. Yeah, the Gemara says that Paras and Madai had a deal. One of them will supply the kings, and one of them will supply the governors. But interestingly, in Sefer Esther, it's usually Paras Madai, except for one time. And in Sefer Daniel, it's always Madai Paras. Presumably, when you're talking about the king of Madai, Daryavesh, you're gonna bring in Madai first. In Esther, talking about Achashverosh, the king of Paras, it's going to mention Paras first. Okay. In any event, Kal Kavel Dana, because of all this, Malka Daryavesh, the king Daryavesh, Risham Kesava ve'esara, he inscribed the writing and the prohibition. Daniel, Kedi Yeda, when he knew, Di Rishim Kesava, that the inscription was written, he had a little problem. Because if he's not allowed to make any requests, so he's sort of endangering his life. Now, what would the halacha be if the king makes a rule that no one's allowed to daven Shachris Mincha Marav? Do you have to give up your life to daven Shachris Mincha Marav? No. It's not Yeharig Ve'al Yavar. It's not Avodah Zarah. Gilei Ra'is Shrichas Damim. Unless what? Unless the king is doing it to uproot the mitzvah, and in that case, even if the king says, you have to wear green shoelaces, you're not to listen. But Daniel was definitely not required to give up his life to daven Shachris Mincha Marav. So the question is, why would he be risking his life to offer these 3 prayers a day? He's not required to do so. So is this perhaps a source that even though you're not required to give up your life for what we call a minor mitzvah, nevertheless, one is allowed to? Or perhaps Daniel did not think that by davening Shachris Mincha Marav, that would be a violation of the king's will.
Like committing suicide, you allowed to do that?
No, perhaps since you're doing it for a purpose, so even though you're not required to, but it's not like killing yourself. There is such an opinion. Or do we say no? Daniel, when a person davens Shachris Mincha Marav, what are they doing? They're making requests of God. Or it's a general tefillah, Hashem, give wisdom to people, give refuah. It's not like Daniel saying, Hashem, I have this specific problem please help me out with. Shachris Mincha Mar perhaps is of a general nature, and perhaps Daniel's calculation was that this was not a violation of the law of the king. Okay, so the pasuk says that Daniel.
Do we know if this edict was applied to all Jews, or it was just meant for Daniel?
To everyone. Everyone.
I mean, so the king knew that he had Jews. He did any kind of chakira, he would have known that the Jews do this, and it's not a negative reflection on the king.
The king probably could care less if the Jews daven Shachas Mincha Marv or not. Nobody would tattle on them. What does anyone else care? The point is, these spies that are going to be spying on Daniel, they're looking for an accusation against Daniel. So they were going to go out of their way to report to Daryavish what's happening. The Daniel ki yida di rishim kisava, when he knew that the writing was inscribed, al lebeise, he went up to his house, bechavin pesichan le beilise, and he opened up windows in his attic, neged Yerushalayim, opposite Yerushalayim. Why did he open up windows? Why did he open up windows? So the Gemara in Brachos on Daf Lamed Aleph says that one should only daven in a room that has windows. You can't daven in Atlantic City, right? You can't daven in the casino. If you want to daven somewhere, it has to have windows. Why does it have to have windows? What does Rashi say in the Gemara Brachos? You see the Shamayim, it reminds you of the Kisei HaKavod and the Rebbeinu Shalom. It will help you subdue yourself in Tefillah.
11.
Others say you have to open up windows because you have to be opposite Yerushalayim. You have to see the direction of Yerushalayim.
Say the same thing about Tchelos, no?
Yeah.
So what do you need the windows if you want to?
Well, the blue will remind you of the sky, but you have to look at the sky.
Cold cable?
So, also, did Daniel have Tchelos? I don't know. I don't know if they...
Must have had them, everyone had.
Did they have Tchelos in Bavel?
Sure.
Okay, so Gemara says, the pasuk continues.
Port city. They have
Okay. And now how many times a day did Daniel daven? V'zimnin tulasa b'yoyma. 3 times a day. Hu barech al berchayi. He kneeled down on his knees. Umetzale, and he prayed. Umoide, and he thanked Kadam Elokei before God. Kal kaveh. Why did he do this?
13.
After all, especially in those days, Marav was only a rishus. So fine, we accept it already as a chayva. The Rambam says nowadays we accept it as a chayva. But in the times of Daniel, it was not accepted as a chayva yet. So why did he have to daven Marav? Because he had accepted it as a chayva. Kal kavel dihava aved. This is because this is what he used to do min kadmas enough from before that day. So Daniel, despite the decree of the king, despite the fact that no one was allowed to make any request to anyone other than Daryavish for 30 days, Daniel does what he needs to do.
Wouldn't it be proper for him to go to the king and say, look, I know you have this decree you signed, but I've been doing this all along. It's not a problem.
Isn't it better for him to go into his attic and daven and mind his own business
mind his own business. He opened up his windows. People are going to hear. They're going to see.
When you open your bedroom window, people are spying out on you.
Look, they're out to get him. He knows they're out to get him.
There's a public
Maybe
law
doesn't.
books now.
What happened to the idea of learning previous prayers and things like that? They didn't.
So obviously Daniel always used to daven with a minion. But at this point, he's not going to go daven publicly with a minion and endanger himself like that. So in this case, what? Like, in shul, I always tell people, when, let's say a person, he's davening at home. Why would he be davening at home? So somebody chained him with iron chains to his bed, so he can't get to the shul. But otherwise, you got to daven in a shul. You can't daven at home, right? The davening with the minion is a chiyuv. It's not a good custom. It's an obligation. But in this case, Daniel was exempt from davening in a shul. Why? Because they were going to kill him. So this is a good lesson. Person should always daven in shul unless someone is going to shoot you if you go to the shul. That's a good thing to keep in mind. Okay, so now we come to the word hargishu again. Edayin, then govraya ilech hargishu. Now here it would be difficult to say that hargishu means they gathered. Why would they gather? They're trying to spy on Daniel. They would not want to make a public spectacle of themselves. So Hargishu here means like they felt him out. They spied on him. Daniel, they found Daniel, making requests, and supplicating Kadam Elakei before his God.
That was your people.
Peidayin. Then Kerivu va'amrin Kadam Malka, they approached and they said before the king, Al Eser Malka, regarding the prohibition of the king, Hala Eser Rishamta. King, did you not inscribe the prohibition? The kol enosh, that any man, the yive, that makes a request, min kol elah, from any god, ve'enosh, or man, ad yomin tlasin, up to 30 days, lahein minach, except for you, Malka, except for you, king, yisrameh, he'll be thrown, l'goy v'ayavasa, into the lion's pit. So, king, you gotta hold true. If you want people to respect you and your law, and you made a threat, and you made a punishment, you have to carry it out. Ane Malka v'yamar. So the king spoke up and said, Yatsiva Milsa. This is true. Kidas Madai Paras, according to the law of Madai and Paras, the law said that will not expire. Bedayin then, Ane va'amrin kadam malka. They spoke up and they said before the king, Di Daniel, this Daniel, Di min b'nei Galusa, who was among the exiles, the Yehud of the Yehudim, Loisam alach malkateim, he does not accept your rules. The alesara di rishamt, and your prohibition that you inscribed, doesn't care about it. You know how we know? V'zimnin tlasa b'yayma ba'i ba'usa, he prays and makes supplications and requests 3 times a day. So the king was very disturbed by this. He was very uneasy about this. He didn't want to hear this. Here, his most trustworthy advisor, a guy who was already trusted to Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar, and all these kings before him, they were insane. They were crazy. And Daryavish knows that if Nebuchadnezzar, who was a Meshugana, and Belshazzar, if they trusted Daniel, this guy must have some kind of godly spirit. And implicitly, Daryavish recognized Daniel's greatness. In fact, he himself saw how Daniel dominated the 120 governors. He wanted to make him the ruler of the land. And now he hears this. He doesn't know what to do. Edayin then, Malka, the king, Kedimilsa Shema. When he heard this, Sagi be'esh Alohi. He was very disturbed. He was very grieved by this. Very much, right? Sagi means very much.
What means be'esh?
Be'esh, bad. In other words, he was very disturbed. V'al Daniel, and about Daniel, some bal. He placed bal, l'shei zavuse, to try to save him. What does bal mean?
Bal was an edict. Huh?
He placed, well, we know, Baal was the Babylonian god. That's why Daniel was called Baal Teshazzar. But here it's not Baal, it's Baal. What is Baal? Rashi says, Eini yodea dugmasai, there is no other comparable word in Tanakh. What it means is interpretation. He placed his interpretation. He wanted to, reinterpret the events that transpired. The Radak offers 3 explanations what the word Baal means. And the Radak says, either Baal means lave, his heart. In other words, the word is backwards. Baal means, or it means his mind. In other words, he placed his heart and his mind to try to save Daniel. What did he say? V'ad ma me'olei shimsha. And until the sunset, Hava mishtadar lahatzalusa, he was trying to save Daniel. He was saying maybe this, maybe he didn't say Shema Koleinu, maybe he didn't say Rifainu, maybe he wasn't davening with Kavana. Who knows? All kinds of excuses that Daryavish was trying to defend Daniel until sunset, and he was unsuccessful. Beidai, and then Govraya Ilech, these men Hargishu al Malka. They gathered to the king. Va'amrin la Malka, and they said to the king, Da, you should know. Da Malka, di das l'madei faras. You should know, king. It's the law of Madai and Paras, the Kol Esar, that every prohibition, Ukiyam, and every law, Dimalko Yahakim, that the king establishes, La Lehashnai, you can't change it. So if you want to be the king, and you want us to uphold your authority, you have to carry out the punishment. Beidayin, then, Malka Amar, the king spoke, V'hayisiu Daniel, they brought Daniel, and what do they do with him? Uremai, they throw him, Leguba Diar Yavasa, into the lion's pit. Ane Malka V'yamar, and the king speaks up to Daniel, and he says like this, whatever God you pray to until now, 3 times a day, he will save you from this pit. And Daniel's thinking, thanks a lot, right? Diant, he says, Elakach, your God. Diant palachle, that you pray to, but Tadira always, Hu yeshes vinach, he will save you. So Daniel is thrown into the lion's den. V'heisoyis even chada, they bring 1 stone. Now the question is, what do you mean they brought a stone? If you know anything about the terrain in Bavel, you know there is now 1 stone to be found in entire Babylonia. Fact in Bereshis, when they wanted to build the Tower of Bavel, they had to make bricks. That was the first time bricks, because Bavel was swampland. There are no rocks that were carved out of any mountains. Kiyim Levenu Kash, because of Havanu ben Levenu. So we see there are no stones in Bavel. So says Rashi, Hashem sent Malachim from Eretz Yisrael, and the same way that Hashem made a Tanai with the sea, that it should split for Klal Yisrael by Kriyas Yamsuf, and that the fire should cool off for Hananiah, Mishav Azariah, and that the lion should not destroy Daniel. But there was no such stipulation made with stones, that a stone should not hurt a person. And the king said that if Hashem could save him from a lion, he can't save him from us throwing stones at him. Which concept does that sound like?
Because they have a Bechir.
Concept we've mentioned a number of times, that while God
can't get involved in human matters.
That while God could, if someone's under the control of animals, then Hashem could interfere. But since a person is a Baal Bechira, God will not interfere with man's free choice, and it's possible for someone to do harm to another person, even if Hashem has not decreed. And maybe Mirza Hashem we will discuss that further next week. Rabbi, have a wonderful day.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.